October 20th, 1827, the calm waters of Navarino Bay, in the western Peloponnese, were about to witness a storm of fire and smoke that would change the fate of a nation. For 6 long years, the Greeks had fought for freedom from Ottoman rule, their villages burned, their people massacred, their revolution on the brink of collapse. But on this day, 3 great European powers, Britain, France, and Russia, would intervene in one of the most decisive naval battles in modern history. When the cannons fell silent, the Ottoman fleet lay in ruins, and the independence of Greece was all but assured. This is the story of the Battle of Navarino, the battle that saved Greece. You are watching Erahive, where history speaks. A revolution in flames. 1821, 1826. In 1821, the mountains and islands of Greece rose up after nearly 4 centuries under Ottoman rule. From Mani to Macedonia, villagers, priests, and sailors declared that the old Greek spirit still lived, and that they would rather die than remain slaves. At first, victory seemed possible. The Ottoman garrisons were scattered, Greek bands captured towns, and the ancient symbols of freedom flew once again over the Peloponnese. Europe watched with fascination. Classical legends were coming alive. But by 1825, the dream of independence was burning out. Internal divisions had torn the rebel government apart. Greek leaders fought each other almost as fiercely as they fought the Turks. And then came a new enemy, one the revolution could not match. Far to the south, in Egypt, the Ottoman vassal Muhammad Ali Pasha had built a modern army trained by French officers and equipped with European weapons. His son, Ibrahim Pasha, was sent to crush the rebellion. In 1825, he landed in the Peloponnese with more than 20,000 troops and a powerful fleet. The difference was night and day. The Greeks fought with courage, but Ibrahim's forces fought with discipline, organization, and firepower. Town after town fell. Villages were burned. Fields were emptied. The once defiant revolution was being erased from the map. Then came Missolonghi, the city that refused to surrender. For a year, it held out against siege, its defenders starving but unyielding. When the walls finally fell, the people chose to blow up their own powder stores rather than be taken alive. The world was shocked, and in that shock, something changed. Across Europe, the cry for Greece echoed in salons and newspapers. Poets, artists, and ordinary citizens demanded intervention. Lord Byron, the British poet who had sailed to fight for Greek freedom, had died there, and his death turned Greece into a symbol of civilization itself. The Ottoman Empire believed the flame was dying, but in reality, Missolonghi had lit a fire in Europe that no sultan could extinguish. Soon, diplomats and kings would begin to whisper a radical idea. Perhaps Greece deserved to be free after all. The Alliance of Uneasy Powers, 1827. By 1827, 6 years of war had turned Greece into a wasteland. The Ottoman Sultan's message was simple: no mercy. Ibrahim Pasha's Egyptian army ravaged the Peloponnese. Villages smoldered, crops vanished, and entire islands were empty. The revolution that began with passion now seemed destined to die alone. But beyond the Aegean, Europe was changing. What had started as a local rebellion had become a moral question that no government could ignore. From London to Paris to St. Petersburg, public opinion was flooded with sympathy for Greece, and pressure was mounting on Europe's leaders to act. Yet, for those leaders, the cause of freedom was never just about ideals. It was about power, influence, and the map of the Eastern Mediterranean. In Britain, Foreign Secretary George Canning saw an opportunity to stabilize the region and keep Russia from dominating the Ottoman Empire's collapse. France wanted to reassert its influence after the Napoleonic Wars, to show Europe that it was still a great power. And Russia, under the new Tsar Nicholas I, claimed to be the protector of Orthodox Christians, but also desired access to the warm waters of the Mediterranean. Each nation looked at Greece and saw something different. For Britain, a balancing act. For France, a stage to prove its honor. For Russia, a doorway to destiny. Still, for one brief moment, their interests aligned. In July 1827, the 3 powers signed the Treaty of London. It called for an immediate ceasefire and promised Greek autonomy under Ottoman suzerainty, a compromise that pleased no one but promised peace. If the Ottoman Empire refused, the Allies were authorized to enforce it by naval means. To carry out this mission, Britain chose a man known for both courage and caution, Admiral Codrington. A veteran of Trafalgar, he was respected for his discipline and for his belief that restraint could be stronger than violence. He was joined by by the French Admiral Henri de Rigny and the Russian Admiral Ludovic Hayden. Together, their fleets numbered 27 ships of the line, a floating coalition of power and suspicion. The order was clear: sail to the Ionian Sea, demand a truce, and avoid firing unless fired upon. But in history, even the most carefully written orders can collapse under a single spark. As the combined fleet set sail from Malta, Codrington knew he was heading toward more than a diplomatic mission. He was sailing toward a powder keg, and every ship in his command carried a match. The Allies were about to sail into the eye of history's last great naval battle, the calm before the storm. October 1827. It was October 1827. The Allied fleet, British, French, and Russian, had crossed the Ionian Sea and now loomed off the coast of the Peloponnese. Ahead lay Navarino Bay, a natural harbor protected by high cliffs and a narrow entrance, the perfect trap for a fleet seeking shelter or its destruction. Inside the bay waited the combined Ottoman-Egyptian navy, around 80 ships bristling with cannons, anchored in a crescent formation under the command of Tahir Pasha, the Egyptian admiral serving under Ibrahim Pasha. They believed the Allies wouldn't dare fire the first shot, but Admiral Edward Codrington had orders strict, cautious, and vague all at once: maintain peace, but prevent the Ottomans from attacking the Greeks. In the chaos of war, such orders were a recipe for disaster. On the morning of October 20, the Allied commanders met aboard the British flagship HMS Asia. Codrington, de Rigny, and Hayden all agreed they would sail into Navarino Bay to enforce the ceasefire directly. No blockade, no waiting. They would sail straight into the enemy's harbor. At 1:30 the afternoon, the Allied fleet entered the bay in two columns. The British ships led the center, the French took the left, and the Russians advanced on the right. The Ottomans watched in silence as their enemies slowly surrounded them, ship by ship, anchor by anchor. The calm was suffocating. Drums echoed across the water. Crews whispered prayers. Codrington sent a message demanding that the Ottoman fleet stop its attacks on Greek coastal towns. Tahir Pasha refused, and then history turned on an accident. A single Ottoman gunboat fired a shot at a British cutter sent to deliver the warning. The cannonball splashed beside HMS Dartmouth. The British replied instantly, one broadside, then another. Within seconds, the bay erupted in thunder. The air filled with screams and fire, wood shattered, sails burned. The peaceful harbor of Navarino transformed into a furnace of war. And in that moment, the last great naval battle of the Age of Sail had begun. 27 ships against 80, 3 empires against 1. The fate of Greece and the balance of Europe would be decided in a single Ensibil afternoon. The opening volley was chaos. A single spark, one cannonball fired in panic, had ignited a battle neither side had officially declared. In an instant, 27 Allied ships and more than 80 Ottoman-Egyptian vessels unleashed fire at point-blank range. Admiral Edward Codrington's flagship, HMS Asia, sailed directly into the center of the Ottoman crescent. Its broadsides thundered, smashing through Egyptian frigates at barely 100 yards. To the left, the French under Admiral Henri de Rigny engaged a cluster of enemy ships near the shoreline, trading salvo after salvo in deadly arcs. To the right, the Russian Admiral Ludovic Hayden led his heavy ships into the southern flank, cutting through the smoke with cold precision. For the Ottoman commanders, confusion turned to horror. Their ships were packed tightly, anchored bow to bow, leaving no room to maneuver. The Allied guns tore through their masts, and rigging wooden splinters turned into shrapnel, shredding everything in their path. Fires spread from one vessel to another as exploding powder stores set the bay ablaze. By mid-afternoon, Navarino had become a floating inferno. The heat was so intense that cannonballs glowed red as they ricocheted across the water. Sailors leapt overboard to escape burning decks, only to drown beneath the wreckage. The roar of gunfire drowned out the cries for help. Codrington himself was nearly killed when Asia was struck by heavy fire from the Ottoman flagship. He calmly ordered his men to reload, and within minutes returned the broadside, silencing the Ottoman guns. The French ships fought with extraordinary coordination. One vessel, the Breslau, alone destroyed 5 enemy ships in an hour. The Russians pressed in closer than anyone thought possible, their heavy ships smashing the southern line to pieces. By 4 p.m., the outcome was clear. The Ottoman fleet was collapsing. One after another, their ships exploded or sank beneath the waves. The bay that had been filled with proud masts now burned like a sea of torches. Out of more than 80 Ottoman and Egyptian vessels, only a handful escaped. Over 6,000 sailors were dead or wounded. The Allies allies, though battered and scorched, lost none of their major ships. When the cannons finally fell silent, Navarino Bay was silent too, except for the crackle of flames and the gentle hiss of water on smoldering decks. The battle had lasted just 4 hours, but in that short time, an empire's navy was erased, and the course of Greek history changed forever. It was over. The Ottoman fleet no longer ruled these waters, yet the real shock of Navarino was only beginning. By the evening of October 20th, 1827, the waters of Navarino Bay were unrecognizable. The once mighty Ottoman-Egyptian fleet, more than 80 ships strong, was reduced to a floating graveyard. Sails drifted in tatters, hulls smoldered. The sea itself seemed to mourn what had just occurred. Admiral Codrington, standing on the blood-stained deck of HMS Asia, stared into the smoke. He had not come to fight a war, yet the victory before him was absolute. The Ottoman navy was gone, and with it, the last hope of crushing the Greek Revolution. But far beyond the Peloponnese, this single battle sent shockwaves through the capitals of Europe. In Constantinople, the Ottoman Sultan Mahmud II erupted in fury. He declared the engagement at Navarino an act of treachery. To him, it was not a battle, it was mass murder. The Sultan immediately severed diplomatic ties with Britain, France, and Russia. The Ottoman court, humiliated, swore revenge. In London, the reaction was split. Politicians accused Codrington of exceeding his orders, claiming he had turned a peace mission into a war. The government feared that victory could destabilize the entire region and drag Britain into a broader conflict. But among the British people, the news was met with celebration. The public saw it not as a diplomatic scandal, but as a moral triumph. Navarino had avenged Missolonghi. In Paris, the streets erupted with pride. The French Navy's courage in the bay restored the nation's honor, long overshadowed by Waterloo. Painters and poets immortalized the battle as a fight for civilization. And in St. Petersburg, Tsar Nicholas I saw opportunity. For Russia, Navarino proved that the Ottoman Empire was weak and that the time to settle centuries of rivalry was approaching. Within 2 years, the Russians would invade the Balkans, marching all the way to the gates of Constantinople in the Russo-Turkish War of 1828-29. For Greece, however, Navarino was nothing short of divine intervention. Without the Ottoman fleet, Ibrahim Pasha's army in the Peloponnese was stranded. Its supply lines were gone. Morale collapsed. One by one, the remaining Ottoman strongholds surrendered. In 1829, under the Treaty of Adrianople, the Ottoman Empire was forced to recognize Greek autonomy, and in 1830, the Protocol of London officially declared Greece an independent kingdom. The revolution that began with farmers, priests, and poets with cries of freedom or death had finally succeeded. But that freedom had come not from the mountains of Greece, but from the fire of Navarino Bay. In 4 hours of battle, centuries of subjugation began to end. The cannons of Navarino had spoken louder than diplomacy. The morning after the battle, the waters of Navarino were silent. Charred hulls floated like ghosts upon the tide. The stench of gunpowder and ash lingered for miles. But beneath that destruction lay the beginning of something extraordinary, the rebirth of a nation. For the Greeks, the victory was nothing short of miraculous. They had fought for 6 desperate years, starved, divided, and nearly defeated. Now, by the will of the sea and the clash of foreign empires, the impossible had happened. The Ottoman fleet was gone. Their enemies could no longer resupply their armies, and Greece, for the first time in 4 centuries, could breathe again. Across Europe, Navarino was hailed as a triumph of humanity, a rare moment when moral outrage and political power aligned. In Britain, poets called it the revenge of liberty. In France, it was painted as the rebirth of Europe's conscience. And in Russia, the victory was seen as divine justice, the Orthodox world rising again after centuries under the crescent moon. Yet for the Ottoman Empire, Navarino marked the start of a slow and irreversible decline. The empire that had once stretched from Hungary to Arabia began to fracture from within. Its weakness was now visible to all, and the sick man of Europe, as it would later be called, had begun its long descent. But for the world of naval warfare, Navarino had an even deeper significance. It was the last major battle fought entirely with sailing ships, the final chapter of an era that began with the Spanish Armada and ended in this Aegean inferno. Within a decade, the age of steam would arrive, and wooden fleets would give way to iron and steel. Navarino, in many ways, was both a victory and a farewell. The Allied admirals Codrington, de Rigny, and Hayden became reluctant reluctant heroes. They had not intended to start a war, but history decided otherwise. Their courage at Navarino reshaped the map of southeastern Europe, paved the way for Greek independence, and proved that sometimes a single battle can redefine an age. The Greeks called it the day the sea itself fought for them, a day when the winds carried not just cannon smoke, but the promise of freedom. And though centuries have passed, Navarino remains more than a battle. It stands as a symbol of courage, unity, and destiny, a reminder that even in the darkest hours of history, one spark of defiance can set the world ablaze.